There's another dimension to Oakeshott's conservatism that runs through your work and recurs sometimes, which is his environmentalism. You wrote, people may not know this, you wrote the first kind of pamphlet advocating a kind of green conservatism since, Theodore Roosevelt. You were arguing for a real revival of green conservatism when you worked for the Conservative Party in the 80s, didn't you?
Yeah, well, actually for the policy Centre for Policy Studies, which was Thatcher's private think tank. She didn't like the thing at all. and it fell on very deaf ears, except for a few people who really, I think, saw what I was trying to get at, which is that if you love the present, I mean, if conservatism is really about loving the present, not worshipping some mythical past, or being totally comfortable in the world, then you feel grief when that's interrupted or when that's altered in some dramatic and cruel way, and you want to conserve what you love. So when you cut down that beautiful old oak tree in the middle of village green, let's say, to use a rather bucolic phrase, or you demolish that pretty little building that wasn't that distinguished, but people had lived there and seen it for years and part of their community, you were really doing some horrible damage.
But this has a much more epic application now, which is, of course, we're not chopping down the oak tree, we're trashing the ecosystem in ways that are increasingly irreparable.
For the pursuit of pure materialism, which he, I think, would regard as anathema. There's nothing materialistic in his work at all. He's an ascetic in many ways. And the great people he loved were indifferent to wealth or money or power. I think that's the other thing about him. And I think that you could make a very strong critique of his political philosophy in saying it doesn't account for power.
But isn't there another potential critique, which is, I think you become very moving and lyrical when you talk about Oakeshott, and you make lots of important critiques, but I think it can also lead you to a kind of fatalism. Oakeshott at times seems to be saying he thinks the whole Enlightenment project was just a mistake, a tragic mistake, and will inevitably fall apart. And I wonder if sometimes when you talk about global warming, when the liberal rationalist bit of you should kick in to say, OK, here are the solutions, you fall into a more melancholic, maybe it's all gone wrong, maybe it was all doomed from the beginning mode. Is that fair?
Not entirely, but not unfair. Not entirely unfair either.
Are there maybe a mood more than a...
I've searched for the last... I mean, obviously, for example, Cap and Trade, when I was writing in the 80s, was all about acid rain, actually. Yeah. And closing the ozone layer. It was fantastic success. And the idea was you'd be more flexible, you'd allow industries to adapt more slowly and pragmatically rather than top-down control. But yes, there is a fatalism there. There is a fatalism there, which I do, in my bleaker moods, feel. I do think, and this is also where I think he's actually a Christian thinker, because I actually do believe that the greatest critique of materialism is Christianity. That Jesus, I mean, the most radical, practical thing that Jesus preached was give up everything you have. I mean, it's the one young rich man comes to him and says, I've done everything by law, I love my neighbor. I'm like, and what do I need to get into the kingdom of heaven? He said, give everything you have away. But this is homeless.
This is the radical disjunction in your thought, though, isn't it? Between the part of you that thinks like this and the part of you that does admire quite a lot of Hayek. What you're saying is not the Paul Ryan plan.
No. Look, there's an uber Toryism, there's the highest Toryism, in which we're all doomed. His last ever essay, which is actually a parable, a story, the retelling of the story of Babel, is really a retelling of the story of the fall. I think we have to grapple with a paradox, which is that, of course, I'm only talking to you today because of the advances of the scientific revolution, which I don't think he would have any problems with. Clearly didn't have any problems with. But making these things goods in themselves, as opposed to means to human happiness and a human enjoyment of the world they live in, is the failure. And if we can do practical things to mitigate what seemed to be emerging problems that we didn't anticipate. And we didn't really figure this out for the last 15 to 20 years. Carbon, this is not something that I grew up thinking about. So it's an emergent problem. And I think you'd be totally open, and I'm totally open to pragmatic, but I do think that he would argue, and I don't want to speak for him, of course, but I would argue, let's put it this way, that the break, and I wouldn't say it's the Enlightenment, I think it's Machiavellian, that what politics should be about should be the advancement of man's estate on earth, our material well-being, as well as that shift of values from a Christian view, that is not our goal on earth, that our goal on earth is to live in a just society and to love one another and to accept the realities of our mortality, of illness, of disease, and so on. I think that's where he's coming from. And I would try and strike a middle course in saying, yes, absolutely, it is a good thing, an unquestionably good thing, that I'm alive today. That so many people in the third world, in the developing world, in the last 10 years, have seen an extraordinary increase in their standard of living and their lack of absolutely appalling poverty. But that, and if we can find a way to mitigate these effects, we should try.
But another way...
But I just don't see... I'll be honest with you, Johann, I don't see a way. I don't see... And no one's proposing anything even remotely practically feasible for stopping us destroying this planet. I think the forces behind it are so overpowering, and we in the West created them, and we have now unleashed them on the entire planet, and it will destroy us. And I think
it depends who you mean by we, Andrew. I mean, I did not create British Petroleum.
Western society.
Most people, yeah, but...
Material well-being, which then depended upon energy.
But those are forces that are effectively hijacking our political process.
No. They're what people want.
I think enough people would be in favour of a transition to a renewable economy if the implications for jobs are explained and so on.
It's
the
bullshit.
block on that,
it's
you
not
don't think
gonna
that's
happen.
true? So I think
the whole green jobs thing, I wish to God were true. It's a complete delusion.
There are...
The only thing that could work, I think, is massive nuclear power.